Hello everyone and welcome to Felix's Space Time. In today's video I've got an interview with Jared Isaacman, the mission commander for the Polaris Dawn mission. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Thank you so much, Jared, for agreeing to come on here for another interview today. For those who might not be familiar with you and the Polaris Dawn mission, could you give a little brief overview of that and your role on the mission?
Sure. And Felix, anytime, man. Always happy to chat. Polaris Dawn is the first mission of the Polaris program, which is really a test and developmental program with the aim to kind of bridge the gap between, the Dragon spacecraft that we have today that can send, four people into low Earth orbit, highly optimized to go to and from the space station, to Starship, of which there will be, potentially hundreds of them that really unlock our ability to kind of explore our solar system, where potentially 100 people could fit in each starship. It's pretty big leap. It's monumental, perhaps maybe the most monumental technological evolution in the history of human spaceflight, and it's on the horizon. So the idea is to kind of use what we have today, to bridge that gap. So, going outside our comfort zone into very high altitude where you have higher radiation, more debris, have to, think through different high energy deorbit profiles, test out new spacesuits. So when Starship does come online and is taking, returning humans to the moon and moving on to Mars, that we can actually get outside the safety of a habitat and explore and construct and build things. Test out new forms of communication, and then, use this opportunity to go through a lot of science and research so that when we are opening up space for the many, that they're actually kind of happy, healthy, productive, and sane up there, so they can do good work in space. So what I kind of talk through is a lot of what we tried to accomplish in our first mission, and we have two more missions to go.
Wonderful. Would you agree with me when I say that the Polaris Dawn mission and Polaris program is much more than just a mission to space? Could you talk a bit more about the things that you do apart from just the launch? I know you did some bits with sort of Starlink kits.
Oh yeah. I mean, I said this before with my first mission on Inspiration 4 that, everything that leads up to a mission and everything that takes place thereafter is just as good as going to space itself. So being on this journey, I mean, it was 2.5 years from the time we announced Polaris Dawn until we actually flew. And throughout that time, I mean, we got to participate in, the development of the suits. We probably went through 40 different versions with different arms and different wrists and different, stitching on the fingers, different pressure regimes, tested, suspended on the ground in a vacuum chamber. We did lots of training and simulations, and we did a lot to kind of help another important cause of our mission, which is raise awareness and funds for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Now, we did that in a big way on Inspiration 4 and raised a lot of money. And Polaris Dawn, has a lot of global reach. I mean, we're using Starlink laser links, to communicate with satellites all over orbit. It kind of made sense in our mind to take that St. Jude message all over the world. Um, so we were lucky we got to travel, over to the Philippines, meet a St. Jude affiliate hospital over there. We actually wound up donating and helping them build a what's called a House of Hope for families that they can stay in and continue their education while they're going through treatment. In fact, I think the unveiling is later today. I think we might be putting a post out on that. So
Oh wow.
we got to do a lot of things across development and training and furthering the St. Jude mission. And we get to continue to do a lot of those things after coming back. So it's why that part of the journey is just as good as flying the mission itself.
Yes, some truly amazing causes. This next question I asked to Anna and Scott when I talked to them a few weeks ago, and they really, really enjoyed it. Could you name three pieces of the training that you did? The one that you enjoyed the most, the one that you sorry, let me start again. Your favorite, one that you found the hardest, and one that you thought was the most important.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, let's start with what's the most important. I think what's the most important is the fully integrated sim campaigns that take place really in the last couple months before you launch. This is where all sides, the launch team, the mission control team, and the crew have to kind of come together and show that they're ready to go to space. So this is where everyone gets to apply their knowledge and contend against whatever the sim supervisors have conjured up. So the first couple missions are as part of the integrated campaign are usually pretty, easy, and they progress all the way up to like the full Apollo 13 moment. And it's only at the conclusion of this extensive sim campaign that you are signed off for spaceflight. Not just the crew, but the operators, those in mission control as well. So that's the most important. That's where we got to see the fully stress tests, like high radiation, South Atlantic anomaly passes, the failure to repress during an EVA or spacewalk, like all the most extreme things that are, unique to our profile and could happen. So I think that's the most important. What I enjoyed the most, I would say, was probably the skydiving at the Air Force Academy. I imagine at least one of the other crew members said that to you too. It was incredible. It's how you get your Air Force jump wings, and it's the only time you jump solo on your first jump, and you have to complete 5 jumps. But they basically took a 2-week course and crammed it into a couple days for us, and it was really intense. It's all student-led instructors. The Wings of Blue, basically demonstration team. So this is the Air Force's team is who teaches you, and they don't give you any latitude at all. If you're supposed to say or do something, they want it exactly like that, not like kind of like that. And it was awesome. And I think those kind of like high consequence training environments are really important for, what is dangerous, which is human spaceflight. In terms of what I liked the least, huh? Probably the hypercapnia training, I think. It was so long ago, but basically it tells you that that is the worst way to go. It's like you'd probably prefer any other demise than CO2 poisoning. So I don't know. It wasn't a long training, but it stands out as one that was probably the least enjoyable.
Interesting. And yes, one of them did say the skydiving training.
Hmm.
We talked a bit about this during the Polaris X Space a few weeks ago. How did the communications on Polaris Dawn sort of vary or compare to when you went up with Inspiration 4?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I mean on Inspiration 4, it was kind of a new record for humans in orbit. There were 14, and we probably had in the mid 80s percentile of comm coverage using legacy TDRS and ground station infrastructure. And on Polaris Dawn, it was a record with 19 people in orbit. So these are not big numbers at all. And we probably were in the 70% range. And but what we did have is we had Starlink, and now that is a big engineering problem to solve, where you're communicating between two objects moving at orbital velocities over a beam of light. So we've seen some pretty incredible footage of, say, Starship re-entering, and that's coming from Starlink, but that's the traditional Starlink spectrum it's communicating on. It's not laser links. So what we tested was those laser links, which I mean, theoretically could be what helps us communicate with the moon and Mars someday, with just constellations of laser meshed Starlinks all, in our solar system, which is kind of cool to think about. In any case, expectations were set that we should expect maybe 20 minutes for initial testing and then maybe another 20 minutes to transmit the violin footage. And we wound up with way more than that, and we needed it. There were a couple unexpected developments that required us to kind of fall back on Starlink laser links for communication with mission control, and it worked incredibly well.
Amazing. Um, how do you see Starlink being used in space in the future, or maybe on Earth as well?
Well, both. I mean, you know, I, I think Elon's rightfully pointed out almost everyone who's attempted satellite communication has probably gone bankrupt. It's incredibly expensive, but because SpaceX vertically integrates and owns the entire system end to end, from manufacturing the satellites in Redmond to the terminals that, and the routers people use to the spaceships that launch them. They can actually make this work. And in doing so, they're bringing connectivity to the disconnected. I mean, you're not going to run fiber across rainforests, and vast deserts. Like there is just a large portion of the world that just doesn't have good connectivity. And I mean, it is foundational to solving a lot of the world's problems. Like, knowledge is power. I mean, this is how you can do, telemedicine with, St. Jude, physicians in Memphis, for people that are in Africa or other parts of the world. And it saves lives. So it has like immense benefit here on Earth. I think we've seen that in action between conflict zones and some of the humanitarian, issues from natural disasters. Like Starlink makes a big difference here on Earth. It also helps, I mean, it generates revenue. It's going to help fund, SpaceX's vision to make life multiplanetary, because as much as SpaceX is a business, there is no obvious revenue opportunity for going to Mars. There is no gold rush or oil boom on Mars. Like it's being that investment is being done for the good of humankind as a stepping stone to really unlocking the secrets of the universe. And it takes a lot of money. Like this is like Manhattan level project times 10 level endeavor to extend humankind's consciousness throughout the universe. So in any case, like Starlink helps pay the bills for that. And last, yeah, it actually is a great way to communicate in space. So the Starlink laser links worked way better than we anticipated on our mission. There's already new generations coming out, and it seems more than possible that you could have Starlinks in varying orbits, around Earth, and and the Moon someday, and Mars, that essentially create a new, communication network, that armadas of starships could someday depend upon. So it's pretty awesome to think about.
Oh yeah, and I hadn't really thought about that sort of point that you made about there's no really sort of obvious revenue stream with Mars. That's a really interesting point. Um, Polaris Dawn went further than any human has gone since sort of the last Apollo missions. What was the significance of this needing to happen, and what were some of the risks of venturing that far from Earth?
I think it's just very important that we get outside our comfort zone and learn, because when you encounter new problems, it stimulates thought on how to solve those problems. And those solutions can tend to be applied to, even bigger problems or endeavors, right? So, going as high as we did meant that SpaceX had to think through high radiation environments that you otherwise would not have to deal with when you still have protection from Earth's magnetic, sphere, that which is typical of the ISS, altitudes. A lot of micrometeoroid and orbital debris, MMOD. Now, at the altitude of the space station, first, the space station is getting peppered with MMOD all the time. But for the most part, at that altitude, atmospheric drag burns it up pretty quick. But when you're in like that 1,000 kilometer regime, it's a major problem, and you can't track every object on radar. I mean, you're less than a quarter inch is not going to be seen, and I can tell you like even a millimeter or a couple millimeters of aluminum will go through like a spaceship. So it's a big deal. Um, and yeah, I mean it's a high radiation environment, and also the challenges of re-entering from that altitude. I mean, you covered this, the kind of the space world well. I mean, this is a topic for Orion right now. It's a very high energy direct entry coming back from the moon. Earth's escape velocity versus orbital velocity, 17,500 miles an hour versus 25,000 miles an hour. When you're coming back from higher altitudes, you have to take all the energy that went into putting it there in the first place, and that's different problems for the heat shield. So SpaceX had to come up with alternative reentry angles in the event we did have to do any sort of contingency or emergency deorbit. So going really high was an opportunity to learn and then apply those solutions to future applications that Starship will inevitably encounter: radiation, MMOD, high energy reentries.
Yeah, and what are sort of your thoughts on that sort of space debris? Have you are there so yeah, what are your thoughts on that and sort of trying to get rid of it, clean it up, that sort of thing?
You're not gonna. I mean, I'm. What do I think about it? One, I know it's real. So every mission I've flown, there's been some, kind of microscopic MMOD hits. This is something NASA studies very closely. So they come out with these interesting laser scanners after we come back, and they always find MMOD. And the odds, are eventually going to, kind of kick in at this point where you're going to take some real damage from it. So it's a problem. Uh, there are ways to clean up the big stuff, but the little stuff is just going to be there forever, especially when it's in your 1,000 kilometer or greater regime. It's not going anywhere anytime soon, and I just don't think there's going to be any efficient way to clean up, millimeter size, fraction of an inch size objects that are out there. So really, you just have to develop, spaceships, that can be robust to impact and not add to the problem. Like that's the most imperative thing. You know, um, you can't have the anti-satellite tests, kinetic-based anti-satellite tests. Like that is, I mean, you're talking about waging a type of warfare that is comparable to like blowing up a nuclear reactor. Like the same way that you could make large portions of land masses uninhabitable from radiation, you could make low Earth orbit, a no-go zone just by blowing up, a few hundred satellites. So we can't you can't wage kinetic warfare in space and start blowing up objects and adding to the problem. Space launch providers have to be very diligent about deorbiting their debris when they don't need it anymore. Second stages, just like Starlinks will deorbit. You need very good detection and deconfliction capability, which Starlinks do a great job at, knowing where each other are and moving out of the way. And then just building spaceships that can be robust to take some hits. Is really it's really all we can do at this point.
Yeah. One of the most exciting and nerve-wracking parts of the Polaris Dawn mission was the EVA. Can you walk me through a few of the main goals that you and the crew achieved during the EVA?
Yeah, so it was again, it's all about learning, right? So a lot of the things that we've done were done in the 1960s. So why does it matter now? It was, well, in the 1960s, it was funded by every American taxpayer, and it was for the few and not the many. SpaceX is having to relearn a lot of these things, largely through private investment, commercial investments, and it's for the benefit of everyone. So that knowledge for going into high altitude orbits, venting down a vehicle and conducting an EVA operation, possessing your own spacesuits can't remain with just three or four world superpowers. It has to be learned by commercial industry, or we're never going to be able to open up space for everyone. So, it was not a complex EVA by any standard. It was certainly akin to kind of the 1960s, but SpaceX learned how to safely vent down a vehicle. They tested the vehicle, they put it in a vacuum chamber. So they knew we would have a safe spaceship when we conducted that operation. They needed to think through contingencies like hatch issues, seal issues, failure to repressurization. And they needed to think through how to train for EVAs because you never want to just do it the first time out there. And they needed to build the suit. And in good SpaceX, iterative design fashion, like what we flew was not the definitive article that people will wear on the moon or Mars someday, but it was a step in the right direction. They learned a lot from it. And, we've already seen what kind of, improvements have been rolled into the next development suit. They've already got new, wrist rotators. We know they're going to a new form of cooling. So these are all like good steps in the right direction. So that's really what it's about. Learning. It's all about learning and applying to solving even bigger problems in the future.
Amazing. I've had this next question in my head for quite a while, but I haven't sort of added it into my interviews before the mission. What procedures were in place if anything went wrong during the EVA? Um, and did anything unexpected happen?
Um, So, I mean, look, every kind of dynamic phase of flight is, we train a lot to, like I mentioned, those fully integrated sims. You do a lot of launch, you do a lot of, reentry, and you do a lot of EVA sims. I mean, we did so many EVA sims. The four of us probably spent like hundreds of hours pressurized in our suits, going through it all so that everything, we could do essentially in our sleep. And so if the number one thing that could have gone wrong that would have been the biggest problem is either a crew member incapacitation because either a suit issue or some sort of decompression sickness kicked in, or a failure to repressurize the vehicle, which we maintained a big oxygen budget so we could come home fully pressurized, which is exactly what NASA protected for on Gemini missions and Apollo missions. So very similar when you don't have an airlock. Now, nothing like that even remotely happened. The only thing that did happen, which we almost were 100% sure would, which is the residual pressure, the outflow from our suits against the surface area of the hatch would be too much for the motor, and that we would have to open it manually. And we've literally did 100 of those in training, and that's exactly how it played out. So nothing was unexpected there. We did numerous simulations like that. But yeah, it all kind of we knew what could go wrong. We planned for it, but it actually went pretty well.
Yeah, well, that's the sort of the perfect scenario. Then the only thing that went wrong is the one that you've trained hundreds of times for.
Exactly.
Um, what did this next question is quite broad, but I'd be interested to hear what you think. What did the EVA do to you? How did it make you feel, sort of emotionally, physically?
Well, I'll tell you, man, it was a lot different than just looking out through the cupola, which is the greatest window ever to have been flown in space. And I mean, when we got in the cupola on Inspiration 4, you'd have to put your hand over your head because you didn't know where, the panel ended. I mean, that's kind of how translucent it was. You could just it really was like being in space, but I'll tell you, it felt nothing like actually being in the suit during the EVA. It's a lot of senses are firing and fusing together in that moment. So it's not just visual stimulus, it's pressure, it's temperature, it's adrenaline, it's physicality, it's a lot, man. And it's great. I mean, we felt so fortunate to be there knowing that 14,000 people at SpaceX have been working hard on our mission, hundreds working on the suits themselves, and we wanted to like get out there and use the little time we had to gather data so that they could build awesome suits for the future. They can be used on the moon or Mars. But I'll tell you, not a lot changed in terms of my thoughts looking at Earth. But definitely looking out into the darkness of space, and I know I've mentioned to others, it's just not it's nothing like looking out the window and seeing the stars or the moon. It's definitely not welcoming. It is like you definitely get the vibe that this is a very hostile, threatening environment that humans didn't evolve it to be in, and that there's everything from debris to radiation to a lack of atmosphere that's trying to kill you. But this is what we need to learn. This is what we need to master if we're going to go out and really, try and figure out, the answers to all those questions that are out there. So it's, it's just caution, as you proceed, but we will proceed.
Wonderful. You and the crew did around, I think, 40 research and science experiments. How did these experiments come to be a part of Polaris Dawn? And what were some that stuck out to you? I know there was the sort of the smart contact lens one.
Yeah, so we put out an RFP, I think like 2 years ago, maybe even a little more than that, where we invited universities, research institutions to propose experiments. We had some criteria that it had to either have a benefit for long duration human spaceflight or have significant health impacts for people back on Earth. And it had to involve some human interaction. Like it had to be worth it for them to be in that type of an environment versus just sending it up as like kind of an uncrewed payload. And we were able to narrow probably 60 experiments down to 40. So we tried to take as many as we could. And I would say quite a few of them directly related to the health issues that astronauts face on long duration spaceflight. So kind of helps answer the question of how this will help us get to Mars. It'll help people survive to get there and come back. Um, so there were all sorts. I mean, anemia experiments, blood draws, so many different types of ultrasounds, including we had a special 3D ultrasound for the retina. We had a number of optic or ocular related experiments because the second most common issue that astronauts face is called spaceflight associated neuroocular syndrome, where your vision changes a lot. And you obviously want people when they get into space and arrive on the moon or Mars to be able to see properly. And so that's also why I wore that special contact, that cyborg contact with the pressure transducers in it. That kind of gets an intraocular pressure reading, which helps you back into intracranial pressure, which we think the fluid shifts are causing. And all these things, you get this data and you bring it back to the researchers, and hopefully it'll crack the code on some of these problems.
Amazing. Inspiration 4 and Polaris Dawn are sort of very similar in the way they share the love and inspiration for human spaceflight. Haley has her books, Cyan has her art, Anna has her book, and Sarah has her music. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how these amazing missions are being shared with the world.
Oh, it's so important, man. I mean, it's look, we live in a very divided world and every issue is black or white. There's no real compromise or in between, and that's really unfortunate. And I think when it comes to human spaceflight, we're going to need the majority behind us, not the minority. Like we need a lot of people to feel like this is worth it. And it's hard for people to get their arms around it when there is so much wrong in the world, people dying in conflict zones, people dying in natural disasters, people starving. It's a shitty world sometimes, And I think it's absolutely imperative, while spaceflight is unique, that we use our opportunities before the mission, while we're in space, and when we come back to show the world that we can do both, that we can make the world a better place that we live in today, and we can kind of invest in this exciting future for tomorrow because that progress certainly stands to benefit everyone. Um, I think you see that reflected in kind of how we approached Inspiration 4, how we selected the crew, the organizations we support, like St. Jude, and how we support them with like a global music event or writing books where the proceeds go to them. Um, it's important. It really is. Like I don't think we're going to get to Mars with only a small percentage of the population thinking it's worth it. We need everyone behind us.
Yeah, because it's sort of the biggest thing when it comes to space flight is people disagreeing with sort of whether it's worth it because of things on Earth. So yeah, there's some amazing points there. My final question for you today. What are your plans for the future? What are some things you'd like to do sort of between now and the next Polaris mission?
Oh, look, I'm still like really busy on the road. I'm hoping things settle down by the holidays so I can just spend some more time with family. But really, that's what I'm trying to do is make my time at home kind of as meaningful as possible. So took the kids to a theme parks fright fest for Halloween. So we did some rides and everybody was in their Halloween costumes and such. Like just trying to I'm just kind of on the road an awful lot, and I know it won't be long before Polaris 2's kind of mission design kicks off, and then before you know it, we're in development training again. And these things are all worth it. There's no doubt, but you kind of want to use the time you can when you're at home to be with family, and because that's more than worth it too.
Yeah. Well, that was my final question for you today. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on here for another question, for another interview, should I say. It was amazing getting to learn more about the mission, and fingers crossed, I will talk to you soon in an interview about the next Polaris mission.
Yeah, it sounds great, Felix, and thanks for all you're doing. It's making a good impact out there. Like people that are educating and raising awareness for what's trying to be accomplished in space is awesome. So thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.